I'm Madelyn Blair. On today's show, we'll be talking with Brian Murphy about business mistakes, mistakes that anyone can make. He'll share his stories of how he survived them and the lessons he learned. And after our show, I'll be talking about bad advice that made it to the bestsellers list, so stay tuned. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Madelyn Blair, and this is Unlocked, a show all about unlocking the resilient leader in you. You know, I've been in business for 36 years, and if there's a mistake that can be made, I've probably made it. From hiring the wrong person to paying way too much for a marketing scheme. The real stories, however, are about recovery and the lessons they teach. You know, there are over 5 million new businesses started just in 2023, and the trend is upward. 70% survive the first year, but only 50% survive beyond 5 years. To put this in perspective, the average lifespan of a small business is only 8.5 years. Now, I just have to do a little history here. In 1920, that's roughly 100 years ago, the average lifespan of an S&P 500 company was 67 years. Today, that average is just over 21 years. Now, sometimes companies no longer exist because they're acquired, some because they're impacted by disruptors like Amazon, Alphabet, or Apple, some because technology changed the market. So failure may not be from making mistakes. On the other hand, business mistakes can really hurt a company, whether it kills it or not. The key is, how does leadership deal with the mistakes? Today, we're going to be talking with Brian Murphy, who is willing to tell us stories of his many mistakes and how he worked through them. Brian Hayes Murphy was the VP of Portfolio Management for 10 years at Constellation Energy Group, with annual revenues of $4.3 billion. Today, he is the founder and managing member of the Plimhimmon Group, founder and president of the Smith Island Baking Company, and consultant strategist to Otterbein Cookies, a 143-year-old cookie company. I think that's amazing, Brian.
As old as Wharton.
Really?
Same year, 1881. Isn't that cool?
It is cool. He's an economist, and he has an MBA in finance from that Wharton school that we just talked about. He lists his experience to include energy, food, consumer packaged goods, finance, marketing, real estate acquisition, renovation, operations, sales, strategy, fulfillment, and software. Now, Brian, I have to tell you that when I list my experiences, all my gurus tell me, oh, Madelyn, it's too much. You got to narrow. You got to be focused. So thank you for being expansive about the fact that when you're around for a while, you get a lot of experience.
Well, I didn't have a choice. And if I had to do it again, I'd probably be more focused. So that's part of my lessons.
Ah, good. Well, welcome to Unlocked.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Okay, now listen, before we get into your mistakes, I think you should lay out a little bit of the landscape of your business path so that business, our audience needs to kind of get to know you a bit.
Of course. Well, as you know, I started, I grew up in Maryland's Eastern Shore. I went to the University of Maryland. I studied economics. I played soccer. And then when I graduated, I went to work for a large energy company in Baltimore. I spent 10 years there. And I couldn't justify going back to school full time. So they have the thing called the Wharton Executive MBA, which is typically for people in their mid to late 30s. I was in my 20s and late 20s, I guess. And they let me in, and I loved it as a special exception. And it was such a great experience. But then I got there and realized I wanted to do something else. And that's where I came up with the idea of the Plimhimmon Group, which was a farm special to my late father in Oxford, Maryland, which is actually, he's buried with a view of Plimhimmon. So it was kind of a cool thing. So the idea was when I left Constellation, I want to go out and find a company because I saw entrepreneurship as a public good, my education as a public good, meaning, it was a thing that I could provide for my family, but I could also do something that would impact a broader community, which is kind of what's important to me. And one day, my mom's birthday is February 8th, and February 8th, 2009, I guess, I ate my first Smith Island cake. And I said, what is this thing? I went to Smith Island, I met people, I found a facility, and before you know it, June 24th, 2009, we're baking and up and running, and that was 15 years ago, I guess.
Wow. Just because
Crazy, right?
you had a really good cake.
I had a really good cake, and I said, where can I get these? And then, the idea was e-commerce is growing. It's still growing. Food delivery is growing. And I love the idea of connecting people. And the Smith Island cake is from the 1800s. I mean, it was very, very cool. It's still very cool. But that being said, it was such a crazy idea. They put me in the cover of the Wharton magazine. And I think one thing I love is the editor at the time, he called me. We're in, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post. People, basically the subject is, you did what? So I said, yeah, I started a bakery 10 miles offshore in the middle of the Chesapeake Bay and 200 residents. They're like, you did what? So anyway, he calls me and he says, I love seeing in his web search, his Google search pops up, graduate of the Wharton School without being followed by was indicted for, right? And you laugh and I laughed. He wasn't laughing because no one cares you went to Wharton unless you're doing something illegal. And so it's true. And so they came out, did a big article on us, and it was amazing. But in the 15 subsequent years, I had a lot of mistakes. Pretty much if I think left to right, I read, left to right. And so the idea is you have a company and you make, market, distribute. Who's your customer? How do you acquire customers? How do you communicate with them? What's your brand promise, your value proposition? All these abstract ideas have actually lived. I had to build a new building. We had to renovate that building. We had to design packaging. We had to figure out how to get dry ice. And so all these things I've learned, Madelyn, over the years, I could have gotten there much faster. And the best way to get there faster is actually to slow down, to take a step back and follow a process, right? My friends joke with me, and you've met Joy, my wife of 20 years. And can I embarrass you? How long have you been married?
51 years.
God love you. That is so amazing when you told me that. It makes me so happy. So you've met Joy, my wife of 20 years now, and they call me Ready, Fire, Aim, right? I met Joy at a wedding. We were married 6 months later because, listen, a 2-foot putt's a 2-foot putt. She's the prettiest girl I've ever seen, and I can't believe I got her to marry me. It's true. And now we have 7 kids, and because if it's a 2-foot putt, it's a 2-foot putt. If she's the one, you got to convince her to marry you, right?
Right.
And I knew this business was a great idea. But that being said, I could have gotten there a lot faster.
Well, a 2-foot putt's a 2-foot putt, just takes a certain amount of time, right?
I mean, right? Like, so that when I was a commodity trader, I oversaw $4.5 billion, some ridiculous amount of money in my 20s. I never even thought of it that way until I look back at, that was actually the revenue side. We would make or lose, it's called your value at risk, around $25 million a day, a business day. And it was what it was. Like, I knew how to manage risk. I knew what my risks were. Mm-hmm. And I always compare it again to a 2-foot putt. Like, it's not easy, but you say, listen, it's got a little bit of a break. You walk up and you execute. And so I feel like that's kind of been my approach to business. But I do feel like, and that's my passion now, is how can I not repeat the same mistakes, be more deliberate going forward? Like, we just partnered with Goldbelly, which is a great food aggregator, because we ship tens of thousands of packages every year all over the country. I really believe we have the best bakery in the country. We ship cakes nationwide. UPS comes every day at 4:00. It's really amazing. Conveyor belts, streamlined. It's super fun, but we're not a customer service business. We can't be. Like, I can't have a great relationship with 100,000 customers. We have 10 employees. So you have to find the right strategic partners, and we've done that. Packaging, dry ice vendors, things like that, marketing. I feel like if I had thought more clearly at the beginning, then I would have made the same decisions, but probably faster with less chaos. And that's on me. I feel like I could have done a better job. But then again, in fairness, I was running a bakery 10 miles offshore in the middle of Chesapeake Bay. So you're there's a lot of moving pieces, but that's the biggest lesson. The thing I'm excited about is, I go back to Wharton from time to time, working with graduate students, some undergrads, like that are entrepreneurs. And so I take my body of work, my experiences, and I really enjoy helping them see clearly and get there faster. Yeah. And so that's kind of what I love to do.
Yeah. And if you're like me, you also enjoy being with them because their energy energizes you. I mean, I have interns in the office all the time because that's what I want. I want them to give, I mean, I'm happy to give them all the knowledge and experience that I have, but then they add a little energy to me.
What's great is, so I have 7 kids, and my eldest is now a freshman at University of Maryland, where I went. I have 1 senior, then a junior, and then a freshman, and all the way down to our youngest turned 7 yesterday. I had a big party at the park for Jack. John, friends call him Jack. And what's great is every single one of my kids, Madelyn, if you ask them right now, what is a business? They would say it's a stream of cash flows. Every one of them. And it's actually like, you laugh. When I was at Wharton a couple weeks ago at the power dinner, it was amazing. These brilliant, I mean, they're all so smart. They can like bend spoons with their minds. And you remember, like, you were at Columbia, they're so smart. And so, but I asked them, so you're at the Augusta Wharton School. What's a business?
And
it's a stream of cash flows.
Yeah.
And therefore I say, okay, the second derivative, how do you measure those cash flows? There's 3 reports: income statement, balance sheet, statement of cash flow. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be unromantic, but I want to also be practical and say, if that's what your business is, then you have to have what I call the review preview. Where are you? Where do you want to be? And how do you connect those 2 lines?
Yeah.
And so the idea is, when I meet with an entrepreneur, like, I want to blank. I never want to take away that blank. I never want to change that blank and that passion. But I do want to go back to first principles. You know, I want to make sure they're thinking clearly.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. When you were talking about cash flows a minute ago, all I could remember is early in my business. Well, I shouldn't say early. I had been around maybe 10 years.
Okay.
And colleagues who were, colleagues who were either maybe they were my clients, or maybe they were colleagues. They had their own businesses. They all said, "Now, you know, what is it that you watch all the time, Madelyn? You know, is it marketing? Is it an audience?" I said, "It's cash flow."
Mm-hmm. It has to be. Like, there's a great thing: you grow broke, right?
That's right.
And that's the thing where, like, working capital. So now, and it's almost a curse where if you think about business correctly, you realize, walk in a hardware store, and they have hundreds of thousands of screws and bolts and nuts and things, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Every single one of them might cost them a penny. That's $800 there and $700 there. Who paid for it? And the other fun thing is, so I was studied economics as an undergrad, and you have the price and quantity, right? The X and the Y axis. But then you have the next level, which is the Z axis, which is time, which is finance. And so for me, I look at this and say price times quantity, or I'm price and quantity, where you have supply, demand. Okay, got it. But then when does the money come in? Because I can tell you firsthand, accounts receivable does not equal cash.
No, it doesn't.
Once you learn that in the first person, that's kind of a big deal.
It's a big deal. I agree. Well, you know, you love talking about mistakes, and I'm really curious. What is it in your makeup that wants you to talk about the mistakes? I mean, why do you focus there?
Maybe because I'm being honest. You know, because no, but I also think that, you know, I like going back to very simple principles, right? How do you know something is alive? It grows, right? It grows. And so if you're growing, then you shouldn't be the same as you were yesterday. And so you have to honor your successes, but also you can't only look at half the coin. If you're saying, hey, I did this really well, I can play with a lead. I know what that looks like. But you say, you know, I could have done this better. And so I feel like when I think about mistakes, I go back to, again, the adage that you make a mistake once, you're human. But if you make it twice, you're an idiot. So I always want to be a human and never be an idiot. And that's a big difference. So you say, okay, I didn't really have the capacity when I started to ship thousands of cakes. Well, why not? What are what you call your binding constraints? And again, think left to right. If I have this brand, like, for example, we're actually about to pivot, my wife and I, along the way, we developed really amazing software that I'm just a complete geek for operations management. Left to right, conveyor belts, scan guns. I love it, right? And so now we're selling our software to people. But in starting that company, I'm taking all the lessons that I learned and I'm applying them to make sure I get there faster, right? And so the idea is you say, okay, what did I do really well? Well, okay, well, I have an amazing brand since the 1800s, Smith Island cake. It's brought people together. It's iconic. And few foods are truly iconic, right? But then it's like, I don't really have a great distribution model. And I didn't think about customer acquisition the right way. And I didn't understand marketing. And I know brand, you know, trade dress and graphics, that's amazing. And I think we've gotten great partners along the way. But I could have done a better job of, like, how much am I spending for customer acquisition? Like, what is my pro forma number for that? It's going to be wrong, but you have to have one. I didn't.
Yeah.
You have to have really clean books. I didn't. You have to have a really good pro forma. So how do you measure these things? You don't just measure it in terms of sales, but you think, what is the funnel? You have to start setting up funnels. You say, okay, well, if I want sales, that really comes from web traffic. And then you look at conversion rates. So you say, oh, we had 100 sales yesterday. Well, how many people came to your website? How many did you expect to come to your website?
Mm-hmm.
And how can we increase those numbers? So all those things, Madelyn, kind of help you to think clearly. And I'm working with this great company at Wharton now. It's a healthy food drink. And she's got a great co-packer at the beginning. So that's an amazing opportunity. But so it's like, she's not worried about that, but then cash flow and margin becomes an issue.
Yeah.
And just to geek out, because I want to make sure part of being romantic is not being surprised, right? You want to be predictable in the things that matter, so then you can be romantic. And if you love your company, I want you to love your company. I want you to love your life. I want you to be happy, but you also have to eat your vegetables. You have to say, okay, how much cash? Today's the 21st. Today's the 21st. How much cash do we have? What we have in 2 weeks. And if cash isn't your issue, great, move on. If it is your issue, admit that and deal with it up front. Because if you're not kind of watching home base, eating your vegetables, all these very simple ideas, then you're not going to be set up for success in the future.
Yeah. Well, I want you to think back for a minute.
Okay.
There was a moment when you said to yourself, oh my goodness, I've just made a mistake. What was that experience like? And what was it in you that said, I'm going to fix this rather than give up?
Well, the biggest one, the hardest mistakes, the ones you don't realize you're making.
True.
The easiest one, I always tell my employees, my partners, I wish Brian Murphy were the problem everywhere, so I can just fix it. And let's just say that you hate, my color shirt or what I'm doing. Pick a thing. I'll just fix it. But the worst, Madelyn, is we don't realize. For example, my most important vendor is shipping. And I'll just, again, part of being honest, my dad always says, always tell the truth. That way you don't have to have a good memory. I was with FedEx, and my rep had made a huge change in how we were billed for things, and I didn't know it. And it cost about $500,000. And that was in 2019 because it was over time. And so what I realized, Madelyn, was that I wasn't making as much money as I thought I should be making, but I didn't really see why. And I was like, oh, well, I'm growing, because if you're really busy and money's going in and money's going out and you're shipping tens of thousands of packages, if you're not really detail oriented and you don't drill down, and by the way, the bills are hard to read,
Yes.
like at Christmas, I can tell you my bill was over 1,000 pages.
Ooh.
It's like, if you're not really watching the store, like if I get an invoice from a flour vendor, it's 35 cents a pound, 81 cents a pound, whatever your prices are, that. But shipping is, shipping to Pennsylvania, shipping to Philadelphia, shipping to Texas are different. Large, small packages. You've got to really know what you're doing. So I woke up in 2019 and said, wow, because I didn't have a good income statement, balance sheet, statement of cash flow, because I didn't have the good pro forma, because I wasn't meeting with my advisors, because I wasn't really drilling down and eating my vegetables, it snuck up over a course of years, a $500,000 loss that I couldn't afford. And that was a big number. So in the metaphor is, so Maryland's got the Chesapeake Bay. It's 4 miles across. And I found myself 2 miles offshore in the Chesapeake Bay, metaphorically. Like, okay, well, I can quit and I got to swim 2 miles back, or I can keep going and that's 2 miles. So I'm like, well, I should probably just keep going. And so I switched to UPS. I'm not saying UPS versus FedEx. What I'm saying is, you've got to have a very clear relationship with your vendor, right? You've got to understand what you expect, what they expect, et cetera. And so I switched to UPS, but with open eyes. And I drilled into the shipping rates, and I drilled into the logistics and all those things, so that after 2019, that was the biggest one. But then all of a sudden, we were making money, we were growing, we were positioned to be a small, scalable gift company. Then the pandemic happened. And if you're a gift company and the government makes it illegal to see your mom like a month before Mother's Day, it's kind of good for a gift company. Yeah. But if then the same government, through incompetence and whatever, doubles the price of everything, that kind of stinks for a gift company. So we killed during the pandemic, but I still was kind of learning how to get my house in order leading up to the pandemic. And it's so easy to look in hindsight, right? I mean, that's everybody. If I knew then what I know now, we all say that. But looking back, if I could have found a way to have a clean house and look objectively at the pandemic and look at our web traffic conversion rates. I was worried about screens and masks and social distancing, but you have to slow down. You have to look at what you're doing and how it's changed. Have things fundamentally changed for you? And if they have, then if they have changed, you have to see it in real time. And then when suddenly the price of everything doubles, how'd that change my conversion rates? How'd that change my pricing and things like that? So I feel like these are lessons I could have learned about scalability, production, margins, vendor accountability, pro formas, marketing budget, customer acquisition, pricing your products. All these lessons I've learned in real time that now I say, okay, let's not make those again.
Now, you've learned them because you've lived them.
Yes.
And I think that a new entrepreneur entering business hopes that they have read all the case studies and listened to this show and they heard you tell this story, but they can't possibly know all the pieces.
Sure.
There has to be something in them that says, I'm going to keep going. So I'm curious about you. What was it maybe in your upbringing that you could draw upon? Obviously, a sense of persistence and resilience so that you just said, I'm going to do this.
So, it's funny you mentioned that. So do you know who Angela Duckworth is?
Yes.
So Angela Duckworth, we sent her a cake. My daughter read Grit. And, the question is, West Point, the whole thesis is every single cadet at West Point is that person, the man or the woman that's like in the guy's case is the 6'1", 190-pound, number one in his class, middle linebacker, the straight out of the box star, whatever. But yet 10% quit every year. Mm-hmm. Why? And Angela's thesis is they don't have grit. Great book. And so I've gotten to know Angela over the last couple of years. Again, her dad, we sent him a cookies and cream cake. Sent him a cake and that's what's fun for me is I'm actually a true believer. I believe our cakes bring people together. I really do. And so it's fun for me to kind of, because they're circular, they create community. It's a shared experience. But Angela's thesis is you can work on your grit, but some people are born with more than others. And I think I was born gritty. Maybe it's because I'm Irish. My last name means sea warrior. Maybe it's my family. But in high school, I've always had very bad eyes, very bad vision. My right eye is so weak. I was, had to wear a patch when I was a kid and all these things. But I said, I'm going to play college soccer, which I knew was going to be a big lift.
Oh my goodness.
But I wasn't smart enough to realize I couldn't do it. And so next thing you know, I'm an ACC champion. I walked on to Maryland soccer team and, the coach there is still my coach and he changed my life. But I knew I had the grit to set a goal and achieve it. But I think that in some ways, grit is a hindrance because just because you can overcome something doesn't mean you should. Mm-hmm. Right. And I love your spirit. I love spending time with you and the few interactions we've had. It just makes me so happy. I feel like, but also there's people in a lot of either hard relationships and marriages or hard work environments or whatever. And there's this tendency with people with grit to just put their head down and plow through. And so grit got me here, but in a lot of ways, grit slowed me down. Because if I'd had people around me who could help me be less gritty and more focused, then I wouldn't have had to slay so many dragons. Does that make sense? Because it's so easy to say, you know what, I'm going to power through, and you can, but always do it on purpose and make sure that you have other people around you saying, like, for example, a friend of mine is looking at starting a video business where he wants to go and do videos. Well, he spent all weekend long building this one amazing presentation for $300. It should have cost about $5,000 to do this presentation, but his quote grit is what got him there and got it so successful. Yeah. But you need people around you to say, well, I get what you're saying, but you have to hear what I'm saying. Is that the best use of your time? Are you being deliberate? Because you're going to have to be gritty. To start a company, you have to be gritty, but you also have to be pragmatic and reasonable to make sure that you're not slaying every dragon when there's a better way.
Yes. Well, I'd always distinguish that grittiness because I like Duckworth's work. I view resilience as really at that place where you make that decision. I'm going to move forward.
Yes.
Now, how you do it and the manner in which you do it does reflect the grittiness.
Work smarter, not harder, right?
That's one way to look at it.
I do.
To me, grit is just keep going.
Well, but I think, and there's that balancing act. Like, I want gritty, passionate people. I am one, right? But at the same time, for example, when our margins started getting tight, I really couldn't afford, for example, hiring an outside marketing company like I wanted to. And I couldn't afford to hire a bookkeeper like I wanted to. And so what happened is, the old line, how many pieces in a 5-piece band? 5. But if you look around and you're a 1, you're like, listen, that's not a real business. You've got to make sure that you have the budget and the margin to find those people around you who can help make you better. And you've got to be, so grittiness is great. But you also have to surround yourself with the right people and make sure that if you can't charge the right price, hire the right people, retain the right people, then either your pricing is wrong or you don't have a real business.
Yeah. Have you ever hired the wrong person?
Oh yeah.
Now, how did you recognize it?
So the old adage, hire slowly, fire quickly. What you really have to do is you have to make sure that you understand the job description very thoroughly. So you have to make sure that you have a very clear job description, and you have to make sure you understand what the person's good at and not good at.
Yeah.
And you have to, and that's part of the thing where I don't want to get rid of your passion and your grit. Please don't misunderstand me.
Yeah.
But at the same time, not everybody is a good fit for everything. Yeah. And we romanticize poverty. We romanticize people that are in disadvantaged positions. Mm-hmm. And I'm the biggest champion you're going to find about elevating people and finding talent where you're not always looking for it. But the flip side is, Maya Angelou, I think, said, if someone shows you who you are, believe them. Right? Yeah. And if you hire the wrong person, which I've done, and they consistently show you that they're not the right person, you have to be honest with yourself. And part of that is don't be an island. We talked about, don't be an island. Don't be the person who, I'm the only one. I'm indispensable. You're really not.
You're really not.
No. And like Madelyn, I've gotten to know you, but I think that, and part of that, what I love about going back to Wharton is there's a certain level of candor that people are required to have with each other. And I think that level of candor, because they're looking around saying, this person deserves the truth. And so they look around and say, why is that person doing that job? And I can romanticize it and say, well, and they're like, but is that fair to everybody else? And once you see something, you can't unsee it. And once you hear something, you can't unhear it. Yeah. And that's part of my evolution as an entrepreneur is, how do I take those experiences and now hire better? Like, for great example, last year, I'm very involved ever since the pandemic in the day-to-day of the bakery. I have to be, right? But now the pandemic's over. And so we're talking about, Q4 hiring, working with my executive chef, my sous chef, my facility manager, and my executive chef, wonderful young man, guy named Garrett. He just married, now he's got a little boy. And he said to me, we were talking about being an executive chef. And he says, Brian, I'm not an executive chef. It surprised me. I said, what do you mean? He said, I haven't been a chef in 2 years. And that was an indictment of me, 100%. And I heard it and I owned it and I learned from it. And now I'm hands off in that regard. Now, he still works for me, obviously, and the company, but does he have a clearly defined role? Does he have the tools he needs to fulfill that role? Is he accountable to a standard? Do we agree on the standard? Do we enforce the standard? Do we evolve the standard? There's all these processes. You're like, okay, that makes sense. And if I can do it for my executive chef and then my facility manager and then our dishwasher.
Okay, I'm really curious. Now I'm really curious.
Sure.
Because this executive chef, I want him to become an executive chef.
Sure.
How? Because that's the best thing for you.
Yep.
As well as him. So what are you doing and putting in place so that he can evolve?
It's already done. So I made that my top priority. I owned it as a shortcoming of me. And again, you also have to don't be too hard on yourself. Mm-hmm. I think that the pandemic was so hard for anybody in the food business because we were one of the few businesses that things just took off in terms of volume, sales, whatever. Yeah. We had people, having virtual birthday parties. Yeah. Where they would buy like 7 cakes, ship them to 7 people and things like that. Like that was not normal. But now we went back and said, okay, first principles, what is an executive chef? That chef is responsible for knowing what we have, knowing what we need, placing ingredient orders, managing to par levels, maintaining inventory, and then empowering people to make the products. Mm-hmm. And so I no longer set our production schedule. He does.
He does.
And I'm learning, and he's learning. And the other thing is, I make it seem so simple because I've said it now a year removed, Madelyn. But I said to him, "What is an executive chef?" Because I have my definition, you have yours. Well, that doesn't do us any good if the person who's got the title doesn't agree on that definition.
Has he defined it for himself now?
Oh yeah, as what we just said
Mm-hmm.
was the collaboration of him and me saying, "This is what the company needs," and then he says, "This is what I want to do." And so we kind of work together to say, okay, how do we get there? Right. So here's the thing. As I said, I call it the pillow test. Every day when he goes home, I want to know that when I put my head on my pillow at night, everything was done correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I used to go to Vegas a lot. I'm a commodity trader. So, I like Vegas. I like playing card games. And so there's a thing they do at the tables. Have you ever been to Vegas, Madelyn?
I have.
So, that they go like this and they go like this.
Right.
Why are they doing that? Because there's like 41 cameras. And they're like, hey, I want to make sure there's nothing up your sleeve, right? So our software called Rico, our software every day, our shipping team knows you're shipping 81 packages, and they scan them in real time. They go from red to green. At the end of the day, they're done. And they can look and say they're all packed. What you want to do, and that's our shipping team. That's the most obvious. So how can I build an analog for our chef? Well, he builds out for the next 2 weeks what our production schedules are. And he needs to make sure the bakery is clean, correct, safe. Everyone showed up on time. He's proud of his employees. He's proud of his colleagues. Because there's that distinction where they're his colleagues, but they're his employees. They work for him. He has jobs. If they don't do a good job, they need to hear about it in a constructive sense. But every day I said, Chef, here's what I need from you is I'm not at the bakery every day because we don't both need to be in charge. I need you to tell me every day that everything is thumbs up. So literally every day I get a text from him around 3:30, 4 o'clock.
Thumbs up.
Says, another great day, little yellow iPhone thumbs up. And I read that to mean he was happy with the products. The equipment all worked. The employees were constructive. A good environment. It was safe. No major HR issues. I mean, we're very fortunate. Like we're very, very deliberate about the culture we build. But at the same time, there were no issues that I should be afraid of. We never want to suddenly have things bubble over that we weren't expecting. So we've been collaborating, and now he's an executive chef. And that's exciting for me.
That is exciting. As you were talking about how you were assessing these people, I have to tell you about this story because to me it's one of my favorite stories.
Okay.
I needed to hire somebody to work with me.
Okay.
And I needed to know, and it gets to this point about, can they make a tough decision and then stay with it?
Mm-hmm.
And so I asked the candidates to tell me about some event in their life that made them incredibly proud.
Okay.
And this one woman described to me that she did a run. She was a runner.
Okay.
But she didn't run on a track or on a road or in a marathon. She was in Africa. And there is some beach area in Africa that is really hard. I mean, it's hot and it's a desert. And she was committed to running on that beach. And she described how she prepared herself and how she did it. And I thought, I'm hiring her. And I did.
That's awesome. And did it work out?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. She was, and the interesting thing was she didn't stay with me long, but I didn't anticipate that she would stay with me long.
That's great.
I needed this much, and she gave me this much, and then she went on. But it was just fun. I love to be able to see people grow and then move on to where they should be.
Well, again, like we said, if people are in the same spot, then that's not healthy.
No.
Like I remember when I was a commodity trader, one of my first bosses said, every year the train comes to the station. He says, and it was great. He said to me, he's like, I don't want you to work for me for 20 years. I want you to work for me 1 year, 20 times. Because I think that the right way, I don't make plans more than 6 months in advance. I try not to, right? And I'm not being flippant. I really don't, because it's like, listen, we're now in October. I've got to get through Q4. I think I've got some Q1 goals, but listen, next summer is the moon. Like, I'm not, what? Like, let's get through Q4. We've got our call today. We've got some other things. You've got your life. I still know my trajectory, but we don't need to make plans so far out. And I feel like, and by doing that, what you're really saying is, let's keep growing.
Yeah. Because
the last thing you do, like there's one employee, my first hire ever, and it got to be a real rut. and you don't like that because she wasn't growing. The company was stuck. She was doing a very poor job, and I didn't have the controls in place to really help her see that and help the company see that. And that was a big mistake. But, managing people, show yourself some grace, show yourself some, again, if I knew then what I know now, right?
Right. I think we sometimes think that managers just sort of begin and they do it. But you have
Sure.
so much to learn as a manager. So
much to learn. And it's a process and it's deliberate. Like I talk about I coach high school soccer. I love coaching high school soccer. I tell the kids getting better is a decision.
Mm-hmm.
So make it.
Yeah.
Being excellent is a decision and being average is a decision.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And you can never, ever be somebody else. So don't try to be. But every day I always say, how much better are you going to get today? 1%, 2%, how much better?
I
like that idea.
Yeah, I like it because it makes them the agent.
Yes.
They have chosen to be excellent, or they have chosen to be satisfactory.
Don't go through the motions. Life is too short. Don't go through the motions, right? I don't want to be around people, don't want to be around me, right? And I feel like what I really want is to be around people who want to be better than they were yesterday. Mm-hmm. I want to help people see what they were yesterday, be objective, and I want to help chart a path forward, right? And you can do that in business, professionally. I love coaching, soccer. It's really fun. Footwork is very important to me. Lateral movement, speed, agility. I don't expect every athlete to be as good as every other athlete. That's absurd, right? Just like at Wharton, some kids are just going to be better at math. That's just how it is. Yeah. But you can be better than you were yesterday, right? Mm-hmm. And you're also probably more talented than you think you are. Mm-hmm. But maybe not in the way you thought. Like, are people helping you see yourself clearly, being that mirror, like my daughter, Evelyn, who you've met through email? It's wonderful. And it's really fun watching her mentor my other younger kids. And there's this process where they're not always gracious with each other. I mean, but it's funny, Madelyn, I do say my kids don't always like each other, but they love each other.
That's right.
And if my younger boys are running afoul of their older sisters, I wouldn't want to be around it. But in the end, being objective, looking out, going, there's worse things in the world because they're not wrong. Yeah. And they hold a standard. So
yeah, that's great. All right. Now, you have given so much examples and advice, but I want you to really focus now.
Okay.
All the mistakes that you've made and you've corrected.
Okay.
Now I want you to think about that person who is struggling to get their business started. Or maybe they are started, but they just need to get better. Give them some advice.
Well, that's my dream. Call me. I think that ultimately what I really want to do is seek to understand before I seek to be understood. And I will never dream for somebody else. I can't do it. So anybody struggling, do they really know what they're struggling with? Right? Do they really know what mountain are they trying to climb? And I feel like so few people are even solving for the right variable. Like, here's a great example. I was making I was a lot of money in my 20s. But I wanted to go out, quote, and create jobs. What a stupid goal, right? Because create jobs, well, how about make a great company? Because great companies have a lot of employees and they're sustainable and they're scalable and they're exciting with opportunity. But if you go out to, quote, create jobs, well, you're solving for the wrong variable because just hire 10 more people. But is there a job for them? Is there a career for them? Is there support for them? Do you have a clear vision? And so I would say to that entrepreneur, take the time to slow down and figure out who you are and what do you do? Where are you? What's holding you back? What do you want to do? A great example, I had this great board for Plimhimmon when I first started, and we met a couple times. And Madelyn, to my embarrassment, these brilliant people from all walks of life, we got together once a quarter. And then I thought I knew it all, so we stopped meeting. What a dummy. And that's how I met you, because there's that Wharton group once a month. We have a phone call. Yeah. And it's like you show up and just chat. I've loved hearing your stories and other classmates and what they're struggling with and, whatever. It's like you've got to be around those people who come in. And great example. When you said you have a podcast, I mean, this is me just coming off my Wharton Power Dinner a couple of weeks ago where I'm sitting with these brilliant people. I'm like, this is what I want to do in the next chapter, because also it'll help me refine my next chapter.
Yeah.
And I thought when you said that, I was like, this is perfect. But I didn't say anything because I wanted to listen. And what I heard was brilliant. Those people in the phone call said, like, who's your audience? What's important to them? What's the demographic? What is success? Who's the best speaker? Who's the worst speaker? And I just listened, because if I hadn't listened, then I wouldn't learn. Listening is a verb, right? To listen.
Yes.
And I listened. And so when I sent you that email saying, this is why I believe, based on what I know, I could be a great speaker for you. And now we've talked, I'm honored to be on your show. But like, that's the kind of experience we need for entrepreneurs, is just to listen and to be surrounded by people who help you solve for the right variables and build out that plan, build out your cash flow forecast, who is your marketing agent? What is your budget? Where do you want to be in 5 years? And how do you get there in 6 months, and all those things? And so that's a long answer to say, like, if I had done exactly what you're saying, if I were an entrepreneur watching this show 15 years ago, I would have had a lot of hard conversations with myself, and I would have taken all of the advice I'm now giving now and gotten here a lot faster.
I'm very pleased to hear you give that as a general response to my question.
Okay.
Because when I'm working with people where they're trying to unlock their resilience, the first thing I ask them to do is to get to know who they are. Now, I give them techniques for doing that.
Mm-hmm.
You're absolutely right. You have to know what you are bringing to the table, and further, where you want to, what you're aiming at.
Mm-hmm.
I also like the fact that when you describe, when you described your mistakes and how you got through them, it was a blending of knowing where you want it to go and then attending to the present,
Mm-hmm.
so that you could get to the next
Mm-hmm.
step, to the next step, to the next step. Fabulous.
And that was like, I was a soccer player. And I wanted to play at the University of Maryland, which is the best in the country. Like, we won the ACC championship. He's won national championships. And you're like, listen, that's all great, but what are you doing today? Are you fit? Are you strong?
Yeah,
Do you know who you are? Do you know who you're not? Because listen, a point, again, is a line is 2 points.
Mm-hmm.
We got to figure out where you are.
Yeah.
Not where do you want to be? Where are you? And what's funny is a lot of times you're a lot farther along than you might think you are in some areas,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot farther back. It's three-dimensional. Where are you is three-dimensional.
Mm-hmm.
And so you say you're actually much better positioned and we can learn about these variables in this regard, but you really are pretty far behind compared to where you want to be in this regard.
Mm-hmm.
And then you say, okay, let's stretch out that line. Where do you want to be? And what can you do today, Monday, to get you there? And that's kind of the whole process that, for me, like my software company, one of the smartest things I heard was, I was talking to a consultant. He said, Brian, do you want to run a software company or sell a software company? What a great question.
Oh, it's a great question.
Okay. So the answer is, like, I love golf. I play the hole backwards, right? And so it's like, do you ever play golf, Madelyn? Are you a golfer? I can't remember if we talked about it.
I'm not a golfer, but I have played
that. We can fix that. We should play. I love golf. My only 2 rules are, you have to be an agreeable company, which I know you'll be wonderful, and you have to guarantee me I'll be struck with neither a golf ball nor a golf club. Those are my only 2 rules, right? We can figure the rest out. Like, people say I'm not a good golfer. I'm like, well, you didn't win the Masters. I didn't win the Masters. You're not a good golfer. No one's a good golfer. But my point is, so you're on a tee box, right? Yep. We all know this is where the hole starts. And there's a million ways to golf every hole, right? Let's say it's a dog leg right, which means it goes around the corner from left to right, and the pins on the back left. Well, if you're on the tee box, you should know that. And you say, well, if I want to get to here, I've got to be here, because people don't, they just get up at the tee box and start swinging. And that's not very thoughtful. Do you see how that's a great metaphor, great analogy?
I love it.
Listen, if I want to be a granddad, if I want to be married 51 years, I should definitely be married on today, Monday, right? Because you can say, well, that's great, I want to get 51 years, but your wife's pretty mad at you and she's got a right to be, right? So if you actually want to build a great company, or you want to have this lifestyle, you say, okay, what are the variables? What are the inputs? What are the processes? And you know, another thing I love doing, Madelyn? I love watching press conferences. It's amazing to me. I love how brilliant people think about their craft. I love sports. But anything, I love, like, annual earnings reports. And I encourage anybody, like, my son is getting into investing. He's funny. He's 15. Now I guess he's 15. But he, what's interesting to me is I said, go listen to their annual earnings report. What is the CEO talking about? What's important to them? Who's their customer? And I was like, there's a great line, success leaves clues.
Yeah.
So find the people that you want to be like, and what do they do? And you're never going to be like them. You couldn't be like them if you wanted to be.
Yeah.
But you can be more like them
Mm-hmm.
and follow, because success leaves clues.
Well, I must say, Brian, I just have really enjoyed this conversation. And
Well,
and
thanks
you,
for having me.
you
It's a
told,
privilege.
yeah, it was an easy call, by the way.
Well,
But I,
you're awesome. I love your energy.
oh, thank you. But I love this, that success leaves clues, and combine that with listen. Perfect, absolutely perfect advice.
Well, the great thing too is, and that's not my line. So Maryland football, I'm Maryland. Mike Loxley is the coach at Maryland, and he said that, but he didn't make that up. No, he worked for
Who
Nick
cares?
Saban
Who
at
cares,
Alabama,
Brian?
and so the whole point is it's a big, standing on the shoulders of giants and
Yeah.
just learning and growing, and like going back to Wharton, 1881, like Joseph Wharton in 1881, he wasn't a business school because that wasn't a thing,
No,
right?
no, he
He
was an
was like, and so
ironmonger.
what's that?
He was an ironmonger.
But my point is, like, he said, I really want to have a business, a school to study commerce.
Mhm.
And people are like, what does that even mean? And he's like, I don't know yet. Right?
Yeah. Well, Brian, again, thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. I hope people got out of this, and it's a pleasure for me, because what you've done for me, and I'm grateful, is help me think clearly and apply these principles, hopefully to my own life. Maybe some of your viewers are struggling with a business, a professional, a personal decision, that they could apply these principles to it, right? Not to be a sterile, and because you want to make sure we're all human beings, but there's a right and wrong way to do things. And so hopefully I was a blessing to somebody today, and that's all I could ask for.
Very good. Thank you. Every now and then, there is something that changes how I think about the world. Grounds for Thought is a place where I talk about these moments so that you can explore the meaning for yourself. Those who spend careful time counting the number of new business books have concluded that there are hundreds of thousands published each year, counting those published by publishers and those self-published. All give advice. I have often thought that many of the books are what I call pop management. They merely repeat what others have said, just using slightly different words. I have no problem with this, unless their advice is shallow, never looking at the various contextual situations that can arise. Here are a few of what are often talked about without any depth. Okay, first of all, vision is everything. The CEO has to have a clear vision that he or she communicates to all the audiences that are important. In any event, the vision has to provide focus to employees. They are the people who will do the work to make the vision happen. But what if the members see the vision differently from one another? When I ask leaders to tell the story of the vision they have, they can usually formulate such a story. But when I ask employees what the vision story means to them, they offer different dimensions of the story, depending on what speaks to them. My conclusion is that the story needs to reflect the dimensions of the employees, and have had groups actually tell their own stories and then together write a news story. Now, a funny thing happens. The news story conveys the same vision as the CEO, but now it has language in it that relates to employees. They actually see their own language. They see their own dimensions. They see their own actions reflected in the language of the vision. Their overall understanding of the vision and its power to motivate them is engendered by orders of magnitude. Number 2, speaking to the audience. Now, if you read a book on giving speeches, there is always a segment that talks about knowing your audience. Whether it's for a speech or a book or a TV show or a podcast or whatever, you have to know what your audience is concerned about, what they're interested in, where they have pain. What I rarely encounter is the book that begins with what every storyteller knows. You let the audience listen out the story. That's just how they say it. Listen out the story. It's a powerful way to convey to the speaker that the story is just the framework you are using to convey the message of the story. That means watching the audience and responding to the audience, to the subtle shifts of attention. I remember a master storyteller describing how he memorizes his many stories. His response surprised me greatly. He said, "I don't memorize them." He said, "I have an image in my mind. The image evokes the opening lines of the story." Then he said he watches his audience. And when they're engaged, he uses that moment to move forward based on what he has just said. He doesn't have to memorize the story. He just lets the audience listen out the story. I had a client who asked me to help the staff become better presenters. They were in a sort of competition. And yet, while being world experts, they struggled getting the audiences they spoke to take the impact and importance of their ideas to heart. I was given a short period of time with each speaker, which I appreciated, because when experts are asked to also focus on how they present their ideas, they might resent having to keep 7 points in their minds when they really wanted to keep their content in mind. So a short period of time meant that I could only give them one suggested change. It wasn't even the classic 3 points, it was one. Each speaker needed a different nudge to help him or her be better speakers. But the one that I found to be most impactful had to do with how they ended their talks. Usually they ended with, "Are there any questions?" Or some variant of this, like "There's time for some questions," or "Who would like to begin the Q&A?" You get the point. My recommendation was to have the speaker ask the audience a question. What surprised you about what you heard? Or some variant that drew from the specifics of the content that the audience was particularly interested in. Now notice that when you as a speaker are thinking about the question you're going to ask your audience, you make sure that through your talk, you're bringing that out and it focuses you as well. The team of speakers, by the way, won the competition, each changing just one aspect of how they presented their content. Connect with the audience. Rarely do the books take this next step to tell you how in a manner that can be done even on the spot. And there are times when you are called to speak to an audience without the usual time to think about what the audience is interested in. It was in a master class that I learned how to do this for myself. When faced with an audience of thousands or even just hundreds, it's hard to look around to catch everyone's eye and then move on to another and another and another. The guru said it very simply. You focus on one individual, where you can create a real connection and tell what you want to say to that person. He went on to say that the rest of the audience will somehow pick up on this and feel that you are speaking to them, as if they were the focus of your connection. The context in which the recommendation is cast is as important as the recommendation itself. What are the stories in the story? Why are you doing what you are doing? Who is the audience for your focus? When I decided to talk about this, I wasn't sure what I would actually talk about. I just knew there is so often more to what needs to be in your mind as you try to emulate the advice of experts. And if there is one recommendation I found as I wrote this, was that when you read recommendations, that you ask the question, in what context? I want to thank you for joining me today. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation and learned something new. And if you're on YouTube, click the like button and subscribe. It helps me and it helps others who are looking for this kind of content. Thank you. I'm Madelyn Blair, wishing you infinite possibilities as you unlock the resilient leader in you.